Premier, thank you very much for your address. And I'm sure there's lots of people eagerly awaiting to ask you some questions. Good afternoon to everybody here today. I am the Managing Partner for PwC here in Brisbane. My name is Debbie Smith. I'm really privileged to be moderating the discussion today, but before I actually pass over to the floor, I do have a couple of questions of my own. So Premier, you spoke very passionately there, and I'm sure everybody here shares your enthusiasm about being a Queenslander. I'm really keen to understand, you're in your second year as Premier, how it's been, what it's been like leading 5 million Queenslanders, and in that context of a very challenging environment, how you've had to adapt and evolve as a leader during that time.
Well, thank you. I can honestly say I do enjoy each and every day, and I have a great team of cabinet ministers I'm working with. 50% are women, which is great to see that we're actually leading the way with the rest of the nation in relation to that. But I believe that, we are absolutely determined to make sure that we can deliver for Queenslanders. And like I said, the people of Queensland have put their trust in us and in me, and we have to make sure that we return that trust. So, we do face challenges, of course, and this is why we're at the CEDA event today talking about the state of the state. But next week I'll be up in Townsville spending a week up there governing from North Queensland, because Queensland is such a huge state. And the real challenge for my government and I is to make sure that we can deliver those quality services no matter where people live. And, we're very fortunate down here in the south east. We live very close to public transport, to hospitals, to schools. I've travelled to Torres Strait, 2,300 kilometres from here. I've been to Murray Island, where there's one nurse, very isolated, looking after, a whole community of 200 people. And when I can walk into that room, and when they can say to me, Premier, we need more health services here, we need more equipment, I can talk to my health minister and we can make that happen. This is about changing lives for the better, and it's not just the Torres Strait, it's when I travel out west, when I travel across regional Queensland. And the best thing about my job is listening to people. It is. I believe I get my strength from talking to people.
Excellent. So you do talk very enthusiastically about tourism and agriculture, and you alluded to the influence that Asia is having on our export market. How important is Asia to that next phase of economic growth in Queensland?
Oh, it's going to be absolutely phenomenal. As I mentioned last night, I had the opportunity to speak to the STAR board and the consortium that are developing Queen's Wharf. That is going to be a huge change for Brisbane and for tourism, when you've got people investing over $4 billion in tourism infrastructure. And the discussion we had last night I think is very interesting, because it's one that's been raised when I went to Australia Week in China as well. At the moment, around 6 to 7% of the Chinese population have visas to visit. At the moment, there's 200 million people that are basically termed in the middle class. They expect over the next 5 to 10 years that will double. And what that means is disposable income and families wanting to travel. And we are in a unique opportunity to take advantage of that. We've already seen our tourism figures increase dramatically, and my government's doing everything we can to attract new airlines here. We've got China Eastern in December flying daily to Shanghai. But I just can't stress to people, we have to start this engagement and getting ready for the number of tourists that are going to come to Queensland. I want people to think of Queensland as being the #1 destination, but we actually need more investment in our tourism products right up and down our coast, and we're actually starting to see that now, and especially when you've got 100% occupancy up in Cairns and Port Douglas at the moment, and they're actually saying to me, don't send us any more flights at the moment because we don't have the hotels to put people in. So that's just a small sample of what's happening now. Imagine what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years.
If we turn our attention to the state's finances, clearly some of the revenue drivers for the state are things like payroll tax, stamp duty, royalties, albeit I think there's a bit more excitement over the coal prices today than there might have been several months ago. notwithstanding this, there's some challenges in how we do fund the infrastructure. What does that next phase of government debt reduction look like?
Well, during the election campaign, we said that we'd reduce our general government debt by $10 billion over 12 years, and we've actually done that within our first two budgets. So we're very mindful that, yes, we have to keep a clear focus on where we can make savings and where we continue to pay down the debt. But I think the biggest challenge for us at the moment is to explore the diversification of our economy and where are the opportunities. Now, in the past, for example, with tourism, it may have been a job that people took on casually. There will be long-term permanent opportunities in tourism. Stephen spoke before about services, the service industry. There is going to be a huge growth when it comes to the service industry, and where Queensland can provide that expertise, especially into our Asian neighbours. I've made no apology for saying to my ministers, go out and get overseas investment. Go to China, go to Japan, go to the US. I've got my State Development Minister at the moment at a mining expo conference in Canada. The Deputy Premier at the moment is talking about international education in the Middle East, and also in London talking about opportunities for finance for Cross River Rail. These are important aspects of government. We cannot shut ourselves off to the world. With our exports as well, we can't also forget India. India is going to be another huge emerging market for us in the next decade, and I'll be leading a trade mission to India as part of the Australian Government's Australia Week in India next April.
So Stephen also talked to us about disruption and innovation, and I know that's something quite close to your heart. And I think everybody here in the room is probably looking at the skills that our workforce are going to need into the future. How's disruption actually impacting government services, and how's that playing out through the public sector?
Well, I think the government also needs to change the way that we do things. I think long gone are the days where people pick up the phone and want to be on hold for 45 minutes. So it's about how can government make sure that we are communicating better with the public. So we're in the process of talking at the moment with some big international companies that want to make that experience better for the customer and the relationship with government. Also, too, I think there's great opportunities for the individual departments to innovate the way that they deliver their services as well. So we're working with them, and I know that the Innovation Minister is very keenly got some great ideas in that space.
All right, I could go on forever, but I should actually open some questions up to the floor if there's anybody that would like to ask a question. Table 6, if we can get a microphone to there, that looks great.
I'm Lisa Lee from Ernst & Young, Premier Palaszczuk. My question is one theme in two parts. Your ministry has one of the highest level female representation in Australia, and like you said, it's 50% female, which is quite amazing. Would be interested to understand as to whether you believe your government has benefited from the relatively higher female representation. Research in the corporate sphere has indicated that companies with female leadership or a greater proportion of female participation generates greater, better financial performance, and I'm curious to know whether that might translate into politics. And also, if you wouldn't mind sharing your view as to why you think the female representation at the ministerial level, at the state, and especially the federal level is still so low. Thank you.
Okay, there's many parts to that question. Yes. The first one is that I remember during the election campaign thinking, I was very positive that we were going to win. So I was thinking, if we do win, can I possibly put together a cabinet that will have 50% female representation? I'm always an eternal optimist too, I must tell everyone. And I actually thought, well, this would be groundbreaking if we can do it. And it does make a huge difference. Just the other day, and Kate Jones reminded me of this, we had a cabinet subcommittee. So we had 4 ministers in the room discussing some employment programs, and every minister sitting around that table was a female, and that's probably the first time we've actually had that cabinet subcommittee work in that way. I believe that the more that we can have equality of representation, the better our community is. I think both men and women bring different styles to the way that they handle situations, but I think it also sends a clear message that if we can do it at a government level, it can happen out in the boardrooms, the corporate boardrooms, and it can happen in other sectors out in the community as well. We still know that there is inequality out there, and when I was a young girl growing up, I can't remember there being many female role models here in Queensland. It just wasn't the case. And the concept of a woman becoming a premier was, very far from my mind all those years ago. Now I'll just relate this story. I was up in Cairns, and two young female school captains said to me, Premier, when I grow up, I just want to tell you, I'd like to be the Premier of the state like you. And I said, oh, that's wonderful. And then the other girl school captain said, no, I'm going to be the Premier of Queensland. And isn't that wonderful that you actually have young people out there now that think that they can achieve their goals and their aims and their dreams, and that should be the way it is in every sector of our community. And if we can actually portray that into our boardrooms, our corporate boardrooms as well, we do it by sitting around the cabinet table. I make sure that every minister reports when appointments are coming through to boards that we're putting together, what is the female composition. But to do that too, we need to encourage more women to apply. So there are a lot of people out there with a lot of talent, men and women, but we want to diversify our boards as much as possible and get the best representation we possibly can to send the strongest message to the community.
You're not going to get any arguments from me there, Premier. Are there any other questions?
Premier Ian Wright, CEDA trustee. My question is relating to smart cities and smart regions, which you alluded to in your speech. I note the federal government has made a significant commitment of funding to smart cities in Townsville, North Queensland. A number of local governments have made significant commitments, Sunshine Coast, Brisbane, Ipswich, for example. I was wondering if you could explain the state government's perspective on the smart cities, smart regions agenda that you alluded to in your speech.
I can't give too much away because that's for next week's CEDA announcement up in Townsville. But I do think we have an enormous opportunity to work with the business community to unlock the economic potentials that our regions do have. And I think it needs to be a cooperative manner. It needs to be not just federal, not just state, and not just council working together. We need the business community on board as well. There are huge opportunities. We're already looking at innovation hubs right up and down our coast. Innovation can happen anywhere. I know a lot of times people are very worried about innovation, but just the other day I was out at Capilano Honey, a manufacturing company that's developed this new prebiotic. And what that means is they're now exporting into Asia, and it means that they'll be able to put more jobs on. So innovation can happen anywhere. But with our smart cities, I think there's an enormous potential where we look at particular precincts, how we can develop those precincts, where we can work with the federal government, work with us and also with the councils to make sure that we can really send the right message to the business sector that here is an area that's ready for you to invest in.
I might have time for one more.
Premier, my name is Adam Marcinkowski from VIP Security Services. We are a recent company that's jumped into a medium-sized company. Our biggest stifle at the moment is the payroll tax. It's very uplifting to hear you talk about incentives you are doing for companies to come from other states into Queensland, but we could employ about 5 extra people and invest in other equipment if we didn't have to pay payroll tax. So is there any plan from the government for the future in doing something about that?
Well, we do have some of the lowest thresholds in Australia when it comes to that. But we also have the opportunity where you can, if you were looking at putting on apprentices, we actually do have a program that you can actually apply for. So I'm more than happy to share that with you afterwards. I just also want to make the comment that we really value small business. We value the work that you are doing, and our Back to Work program in regional Queensland, for example, is a great opportunity for if businesses want to actually put on an extra person, that the government will actually provide money to that business to put that person on for a year. So I'm happy to share more information with you about that. We're just ramping that up at the moment. We've got our offices in place in the regions. Minister Grace advised us yesterday that they're all up and running. But where we can make things better for small business, we are more than happy. And that's why I've also made Leanne Enoch a dedicated small business minister as well. And she's already put in place some funding packages around that. So happy to follow up.
I did see one down here. I did say that was the last question, but this is the very last question.
Premier, thank you for the very positive address. My name is John Steen. I'm from the University of Queensland. I note your the investments that you're making in innovation, including in power generation. But this same process is putting at risk the assets that Queenslanders own, the power generation and power distribution assets. And these are very much at risk of being disrupted and losing their value. Is this something that you're now thinking about, having embraced the innovation agenda?
Look, I think that's a very good question, and I think that the two can coexist. I mean, we do have our income-producing assets are delivering dividends back to the state government, which is really important that we can put back into services, which whether it's building new roads, building new hospitals, building new schools, but also too there's enormous opportunity for our renewables. And the fact that we have secured over 50% of that funding through ARENA means that there will be 6 new solar farms that will be built in Queensland. And I noticed just on the presidential debate the other night, where Hillary and Donald were talking about solar, well Queensland is in a really good place to capitalise on that. But we also know there is a lot of innovations happening. I went and visited the Tesla factory when I was over in California. They're very interested in doing some partnerships with us. I don't think that people should fear innovation. I think it can work to our benefit, and it's up for us to set those parameters. So I do believe that they can coexist, but we have a very firm focus on making sure that we have a clean, renewable industry in this state.
So, Premier, you do have a significant number of community leaders in this room. Do you have an ask of us all here today?
I have a big ask, actually, and I think that is please to continue working with us, because when we do work together, we can achieve great things. And honestly, our economy has reached that turning point. And if we all get on board, and if we all start, being positive about our economy, it can only lead to, honestly, a bigger and brighter future for Queensland, whether that's in tourism, whether that's in advanced manufacturing, whether that's in innovation, whether that's in our export industry as well. And it's also that we cannot close ourselves off to the rest of the world. We have a huge opportunity, Queensland being so close to China, to Japan, to India, some of our greatest trading partners. But we cannot put any of these jobs at risk, as I mentioned in my speech today. And we need to stand up, we need to be accounted for, and government will continue to work very closely with business and with the union movement, because I believe that where we all work together, we can deliver the best for Queensland people. And that's been my style for the last 18 months, and that's the style I want to continue into the future. So thank you very much.
So, Premier, thank you very much for your time today, and certainly for being very open with your responses to the questions that have come from the floor. I do wish you all the very best for the year ahead, but I do want to hand over to Dale Connor, who is the Managing Director Building for Lend Lease, to offer the formal vote of thanks.